Hello and welcome to the Three Books for Hearts and Minds podcast. I am not Phil Schiavone, as you may notice. My name is Sam Levy, and as we move from a monthly show to a twice-a-month format, I am excited to jump in as one of our co-hosts for Three Books for Hearts and Minds. And here with me, as always, is the host with the most things to say about books that you should be reading, Byron Borger.
Well, thanks, Sam. I'm so grateful to have you as a co-host here. Phil has got us running on this thing, and I never would have done it on my own. But podcasts are fun, and people have enjoyed it. So thanks, you guys, for dragging me into the 21st century, and thank you for helping out with this, because you and I have had lots of good conversations about lots of books over the years. You too work for the CCO, like Phil does. And so we're grateful for your commitment to campus ministry and to leading folks in campus ministry. You're a staff director there, right? Is that what you call yourself now?
Yes, area director in Philadelphia.
Fantastic.
Well, Byron's got some exciting books in store for us to talk about today. I am very excited to get to dive into the world of fiction with Byron. So Byron, what do you have for us today?
Well, as you may know, Sam, we talked about this a little while ago, that in our regular Book Notes newsletter, and if you're a podcast listener but don't subscribe to that, you really should. We do this Book Notes newsletter almost every week. And a couple of weeks ago, the Book Notes was highlighting books about reading, deep reading and thoughtful reading, really good stuff that inspires book lovers, I think. But in that list of books about books, I said, for instance, and then I had a link to a PDF I made. It was a handout for a retreat I was doing of over 75 novels that we wanted to recommend, that my wife and I have read either separately or together. And we couldn't stop ourselves. And we hit almost 80 novels. And we didn't even name them all, but just a sentence or two about each one. And these were for pastors who would, we were arguing, benefit from reading, entering the world of literature, not just to steal a quick story or to get a quick line, but to shape your whole imagination and empathy about how other people live as you enter into the world of fiction. You were an English major, right, in college? Yeah. So reading novels, something you'd like to do?
Yes, I love novels and usually have a novel going, and along with the other books that I'm reading, especially in the summer. Summertime is a big time for catching up on some of the novel reads that I've been waiting for.
Well, I'm delighted to talk about just three, because we do three from Hearts and Minds. So I'm going to do three books. But before I do that, I know we want to keep this kind of succinct, but I would like to read an excerpt from a talk by Eugene Peterson. Eugene Peterson is known for paraphrasing the Bible in The Message, for writing stuff about being a pastor, for his own memoir called The Pastor. He's written some great books over the years and was a fiercely loyal customer of ours. And so I love reading this piece where he writes about reading a contemporary, almost postmodern novel, and how it affected him as a minister. Can I just read this excerpt? Is that okay to do here on this podcast?
Yes, please.
This is from a collection of essays called Subversive Spirituality, and the essay is called Novelists, Pastors, and Poets. And this is what Peterson says. It's a long quote, but forgive me, I'm just going to read a page or two here. He says, the first book on pastoral care that meant anything to me personally or vocationally was Ulysses by James Joyce. 2/3 of the way through this meander of a narrative, I saw what I could be doing, should be doing, in my rounds as a pastor, going into homes, going into hospitals, meeting people, talking with them on the street. Before Ulysses, Peterson says, I never looked on this part of my world as particularly creative. I knew it was important, and I accepted that it had to be carried out, whether I felt like it or not. But except for the occasional epiphanies, it was not that interesting. Nearly everything else I did, preaching, praying, writing, teaching, administering, put far greater demands on my mind and imagination and spirit, pulled the best out of me and pushed me to my limits. But making small talk with someone around a water fountain calling on a lonely woman, visiting a man in the hospital. These were more or less routine functions that I just did. He says he did them satisfactorily with a modest investment of tact and compassion and faithfulness. So it was, Peterson says, until I read Ulysses. At about page 611, an earthquake opened a fissure at my feet, and all my assumptions of ordinariness dropped into it. All these routines of pastoral care suddenly were no longer routines. You can see, Sam, while I'm reading this quote, and it gets more interesting here, but it's Peterson talking about a novel, a fictional piece, a hard-to-read novel at that, a crazy, odd postmodern novel. At 611, page 611, opened up a fissure for him, and everything changed for him. He says, Leopold Bloom, the Ulysses of James Joyce's story, was a very ordinary man. There was no detail in his life that was distinguished unless it was his monotone ordinariness. Dublin, the town where he lived, was a very ordinary town with nothing in it to set it off, unless it was its depressing ordinariness. A colorless, undistinguished human being in this colorless, undistinguished town provides the contents of the novel. James Joyce narrates a single day in the life of the Dublin Jew, Leopold Bloom. Detail by detail, Joyce takes us through a single day of his life in which nothing notable happens. But as the details accumulate, observed with such acute and imaginative care, the realization begins to develop that, common as they are, these details are all uniquely human. Flickers of recognition signal memories of the old myth, Homer's grand retelling of the adventure of the Greek Ulysses as he traveled all the country of experience and possibility and finally found himself at home. Peterson says, I woke up. Joyce woke me up to the infinity of meaning within the limitations of the ordinary person in an ordinary day. Leopold Bloom, buying and selling, talking and listening, eating and defecating, praying and blaspheming, is mythic in the grand manner. The 20-year voyage from Troy to Ithaca that Homer's Ulysses took is repeated every 24 hours in everyone's life if we only have eyes and ears for it. Well, then he goes on and he talks about pastoral care, thinking in light of Leopold Bloom and what the ordinary people that he meets, and he names them, people in his parish, and how he had to begin to weave together their stories of ordinariness with the biblical epic drama and how the two interrelate, all because he read this novel. So I guess novels are fun, they're pleasurable, beach reads, summertime. I mean, it's a good, enjoyable, pleasant thing to do in God's world, to take some time and read a novel. But I also wanted to note that there's some theological stuff that goes on, some human stuff that goes on when you enter another world and are open with the eyes and ears to see stuff that could be making a difference, as it did for Peterson of all people. So anyway, that's my little argument for why we should read novels. Even pastors or thinkers or deep readers who are serious about reading theology and all kinds of other things should also be enjoying simple books to read for pleasure, because who knows what's going to happen on page 611 if you hang in there.
That's right. I love that. I really believe that the call to follow Jesus is not just something that should cause us to put on our thinking caps, but to gear up our imaginations. And reading novels as well as poetry, I really believe is one of the best ways to form our imagination and to help us learn to pay attention to the world around us that we're called into, that we're called to serve and love as God does. And so in the CCO, as we are transforming college students to transform the world, reading novels is one of the tools that we have to help shape our imaginations and shape our attention to be able to be faithful to our call. So
do you have a novel that, like Peterson, I'm putting you in the spot here, that like Peterson made some sort of difference in your life, or you had some insight where you went, wow, like when you read it, you're like, huh? Anything that just stands out that strikes you? You've read so much that it may be hard to remember. People ask me my favorite novel, and I'm dumbfounded because I don't know what to say. And so often I sound like I haven't read anything because I'm like, I don't know.
I
Often,
feel exactly the same way. I never know exactly how to answer that question, but I think in light of that quote, I think one that I read a couple of years ago um, is I don't know if it's quite 611 pages, but it's also a very large one. Was The Brothers K by David James Duncan, not part of its namesake, The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky, which is also a wonderful novel. But it's a story of family and baseball, which I love, but also race and class and uh, uh, just so many things that are part of the web of our lives, and about faith and what God is up to in the midst of that, and what our relationship to God and to those in our lives, uh, how that shapes and forms us and changes over time, as we pursue truth. And so
you
it's
know, Sam, that's one of my wife's favorite books of all time. I loved it too, and I almost was going to mention it today, and I thought it's too much. It's too sacred. That book really means a lot to me. But even equally so, his one about fishing called The River Why, W-H-Y. I led a book club at our church reading that novel together last summer, and it was a blast. So creative, so odd, so long, so perplexing. What a story, The River Why and The Brothers K. And then finally, after 30 years, he wrote a new one now called Sun House. It's long awaited. I'm a big fan. We could spend all day just talking about either of those three great novels of his. The three that I picked for now are perhaps not as daunting and as wild as those, but they are all really good. I'm going to start with a slow, gentle one. It won't surprise you. Listeners know that I'm a fan of Wendell Berry, his essays, his politics, his prose about land and place and agribusiness, as well as his poetry about Sabbath and rest and nature. But he's most beloved for his novels, I think, all set in the same location, a fictional town in Kentucky, and his short stories, which are also set in the same fictional town. So kind of like, I don't mean to say like a soap opera to make it sound cheesy, but like a good TV show or something, you know, everything is interconnected. You pick up his older novels or his newer novels, the same characters populate them, children and grandchildren and aunts and uncles and friends of the people that are members of the community. He talks about the membership of this town. Well, of all of his novels, his most famous is probably Jayber Crow, which is a book Eugene Peterson used in training pastors, actually. But my favorite, I think I'm willing to say even better than Jayber Crow, is his book called Hannah Coulter. A little slimmer than Jayber Crow, similar, some of the same characters, set in the same place. And Hannah is an old woman in the story. And as an old woman, she has outlived three husbands through the 20th century. Um, it is her remembrances of Fort Williams, the town, the family, the people, Jayber, and her husbands. And so it's three sort of romances, dearly beloved husbands, all that died in different ways. And she's an older lady remembering all this. So that's the plot. That's the story. I love the book. I love Hannah Coulter. I could tell you so many of the sub themes and stuff that are in here, but let me just highlight one that's very brief, a little episode that happens, but it always tugs at my heart. I've read it twice. And I think for some people of my age, at least, it may resonate a bit because in this book, of course, they're farming people, they're rural people, they have a commitment to place, they don't like progress and modernity and all the changes of agribusiness and chemicals and big farms. They like their little plot of land that they steward well. Well, Hannah has a couple of kids. And in the novel, near the end, one of her children, who grew up leaving the farm, got a PhD in agriculture, and now works for the government, traveling around telling newfangled ways to make your farms better, comes back to visit. And she says later that she has a hard time. She loves her son, but she doesn't respect him because he doesn't have any dirt under his fingernails. which is to say he's talking about something that he doesn't know anything about, really. He doesn't farm anymore. So he talks about farming. Um, here's just one little part about the visit with them. She says, he fits my love, her son, but he no longer fits the place or our life or the knowledge of anything here. Since a long time ago, when he came back as a stranger. He and his wife and their children and I are strangers. We spend 2 or 3 days together trying mightily to be nice to one another and even succeeding, but we remain strangers. We don't know the same things. We have nothing in common to talk about. We don't always agree about the news, and so we avoid that. I ask about their lives, but they have little confidence that I can understand their lives, and they don't tell me much. The conversation keeps itself going, keeps circling back to Port Williams, to things Matty remembers, to people he used to know. Memories, you can tell, that seem a little odd to him now, as if from another life, while his wife smiles and pretends to be interested, and the children play on the floor with the toys they have brought, but pay no attention. He later says, though we kept calling him Matty, and I still do, the name fits him as poorly now as he fits this place. We have no other name for him, but he doesn't look right for the name. He looks like somebody expecting to be called Mr. Coulter. He has too much honesty to pretend to be interested in whatever is happening here on the place. Farming is behind him now, and it's completely behind him. He's always looking away, and now when he is here, it appears really that he doesn't seem where he is. His children, as they have come along, have picked this up from him. When they're here, they don't know where they are. And maybe it's not possible for them to find out because they don't want to know. Well, that sort of sad episode of a grown child coming back and not fitting into the farm and being embarrassed of the place, and the mother not sure what to do, realizing he's moved on to a different life. Of course, he's teaching agriculture, which is the irony that he doesn't know the very stuff he's talking about. Well, anyway, that's a book that's one of my all-time favorites, Hannah Coulter. Can I tell you about another quick?
Yes, please.
This is a funny one, and it's a great book. It is called The Jesus Cow. Speaking of farmers and small town life, Michael Perry is a nonfiction writer. He's written maybe 8 or 9 books set in upper Wisconsin or Minnesota. He's an EMT, and he meets his neighbors one siren at a time, as he puts it. He has collections of essays and short stories, and mostly one book about falling in love with a truck, one about building a chicken coop. He's a philosopher. In fact, he has a book on philosophy, and he's hilarious. He's not as high-snootin' as Garrison Keillor, but he is this sort of Midwestern guy with a churchy background, down to earth, and funny as all get out. Well, he only has one novel. It's called The Jesus Cow. Here is the preface or the prologue to this story. It begins on Christmas Eve, and the story starts like this. On Christmas Eve itself, the bachelor Harley Jackson stepped into his barn and beheld there, illuminated in the straw, a smallish newborn bull calf, upon whose flank was born the very image of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Well, said Harley, that's trouble. Literally, this cow has an imprint of what appears to be Jesus on the side, and he and his buddy decide they could make some money having people come in to look at this Jesus cow as they start talking about it. And people actually do. And the question of whether this farm can sustain the tourists that start coming, and the belief these tourists bring, like a mega church or a healing zone, all kind of people start coming, and they start telling them all these things. It's just a cow, and they just saw this thing that kind of looks like Jesus, and he knows it's going to be trouble, but they fall for it. And it's a comedy of errors of all kind of crazy stuff that happens on this farm with this cow. I really like it. It's It says in the back, life is suddenly full of drama for low-key Harley Jackson. A woman in a big red pickup has stolen his bachelor's heart. A Hummer-driving developer hooked on self-improvement audiobooks is threatening to pave the last vestiges of his family farm. And inside his barn lies a calf bearing the image of Jesus Christ. Harley's best friend, Billy, urges him to sidestep the woman, fight the developer, and get rich off the calf. But Harley takes the opposite tack, hoping to avoid what his devout, dearly departed mother would have called a scene. And then the secret gets out right through the barn door, and Harley's miracle goes viral. So that's the story. Michael Perry is a great writer. His nonfiction essays are amongst my favorite. I read anything he does. And this is his great novel that is got some serious faith stuff going on in it in a sort of funny kind of way.
Mm.
Well, speaking about books that have a faith element, this one is not funny, but it is one of my all-time favorite reads. It is called Peace Like a River by Lief Enger. Lief Enger has a brand new one that just came out that lots of people are talking about. My wife loved it, but this was his first, came out several years ago. And the New York Times said it's a reminder of why we read fiction to begin with. It is the story of family, again, sort of set in the Midwest, small town, a decent man who actually can do miracles, although he only does a couple in the book. He's a Christian. They go to a Pentecostal service, but it's kind of out of his comfort zone. He's an ordinary Christian, but he has this encounter with God that allows him to do a couple miracles. So there's a little bit of supernatural, a magical realism here, or maybe it's just out and out Christian miracles, but there's a little bit of weirdness. And in the story, his one son shoots an intruder. I'm not saying too much about the spoiler alert, but there's a murder. And the boy decides he needs to run for it before he gets caught and takes off. The father, whose wife has died, the father and his two younger kids eventually decide they need to get a Winnebago or something and go on the road out to the Dakotas to find their son. And so it is a Western story, a chase story. It is a journey on the road. The girl is really precocious and is writing a story in the context of this story. So her little story unfolds as she writes this poetic rhyme. And she's real snooty and real precocious and real smart literarily. The younger boy is a different kind of kid, doesn't like the literature as much, but he has faith in his big brother and he wants to find him. So the miracle working father, the precocious boy, and the really precocious literary girl who's writing a story decide to head out west and try to track down their son. Of course, in the meantime, the cops are trying to find the son, and different people take them in, different people help them. I don't want to say much more about what goes on. It's been out about 25 years, this book has, and it still appears on lots of people's bestseller list. Here's just one quote that one reporter wrote about it. He said, "It's dangerous work writing about faith. To get it right, as Lief Enger does in his novel, is nothing short of miraculous. What could be unbelievable becomes extraordinary in Enger's hands. If words can bolster lapsed faith, if a story can sturdy a shaky foundation, then the flow of Enger's amazing new novel may bring more than a few of us to his promised peace." Another writer said, "One of the most wondrous books I've read in years. If Peace Like a River is reminiscent of anything, it might be John Irving's Prayer of Owen Meany, another novel infused with transformative magic. What do I make of Peace Like a River? That something rare and precious and maybe even miraculous has come this way." So reviewers have said some really nice stuff about this book. It really is a wonderful read. Lief Enger, I'm told, is a good man. A few of my friends have met him. So between Michael Perry's hilarious Jesus Cow and that great Wendell Berry novel and this Peace Like a River, there you got 3 novels, 3 books from Hearts and Minds.
Fantastic. You started with Hannah Coulter, and of course, I think Wendell Berry is a great example of someone who, he writes essays, he writes plenty of nonfiction prose. He's someone with a lot to say, a lot of ideas to convey, but perhaps and sometimes we need to read that plainly in nonfiction format. But oftentimes the best way to convey those ideas is a way that sort of gets under our skin in a story, in a novel.
You're so right. And if I tell people, if you want to understand Wendell Berry's prose, and some of it is fairly heady stuff, if you want his sort of social imagination of the world and our place in it, read his novels and then come to his nonfiction. And perhaps you'll understand his nonfiction even better because you can imagine the stories and the characters and the things that they go on in things like Hannah Coulter and Jayber Crow. Absolutely. Yep. And I think it's that way with Michael Perry too. His essays, although they're funny, are really substantive. I mean, they're saying good things about life and times and work and friends and small town life. And he captures some of that in his novel. So there you go.
That's great. So if you're someone who already reads a lot of fiction and enjoys novels, these are some great recommendations. And maybe you're not someone who reads novels. Maybe most of your reading or all of your reading is nonfiction. We would challenge you to pick up a novel. And what better place to start than one of these three that Byron has shared with us. So we thank you so much for listening. We're grateful for all of you coming along on this journey with us. If you want to place an order, you can order one of these books. The first link on the episode description will take you to the order form at Hearts and Minds Books. Make sure to like this podcast and share it far and wide. And we would love for you to contact either or both of us, between Byron and I, and Phil as well, and share your thoughts. And we would love for you especially to read these books and tell us what you think. Comment or send an email to us. So for Byron, Hearts and Minds, and the CCO, this has been another episode of the 3 Books from Hearts and Minds podcast.